Ancient literature comprises religious and scientific documents, tales, poetry and plays, royal edicts and declarations, and other forms of writing that were recorded on a variety of media, including stone tablets, papyri, palm leaves, and metal. Long before the Bible, humans recorded tales of our origins as a species and the birth of our civilizations. This presentation endeavors to introduce the viewer to some of the oldest and most important texts. We cannot stress enough that this is not a comprehensive nor complete list. Such a compilation would be many dozens of hours long and completely impractical for this single presentation. Perhaps the best perspective to take is that this is kind of like a greatest hits list. Please note that several of the entries on this list are available in complete form here on the archive channel. Links throughout the video and in the description will be available for you to access these presentations. The Eridu Genesis myth comes from the Old Babylonian Empire and is usually dated to about 1600 BCE. It was written on clay tablets which are quite fragmented. It is often referred to as the Sumerian flood myth. This is because it's recorded in Sumerian cuneiform. Despite being recorded in the late Old Babylonian period, the story is quite ancient. It has some parallels with the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Eridu Genesis is an explanation of creation and the order of things. Sudra, the main character, survives 7 days and nights of flooding, not 40, and he is rewarded at the end with the eternal life and breath of the gods. The story is not as much an epic like that of Gilgamesh as it is a theological description of creation. Therefore, it's often compared to the biblical Genesis rather than the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Eridu Genesis, mankind is destroyed because of the behavior of human beings which appear to be a bother to the gods who created them. The original intention was to create humans that could work and toil in place of the gods, but these humans were just annoying them. This is altogether different than the explanation of the biblical story as well as the Epic of Gilgamesh, both describing the flood as a result of humanity's sinfulness. The Enuma Elish is the Babylonian creation myth. It was recovered by English archaeologist Austen Henry Layard in 1849 in the ruined library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, which is present-day Mosul in Iraq. A form of the tale was first published by English Assyriologist George Smith in 1876. Active research and further excavations led to near completion of the text and improved translation. It has about 1,000 lines and is recorded in Akkadian on 7 clay tablets, each holding between 115 and 170 lines of Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform script. This epic is one of the most important sources revealing the Babylonian worldview. Over the 7 tablets, it describes the creation of the world, a battle between gods focused on the supremacy of Marduk, the creation of man destined for the service of the Mesopotamian deities, and it ends with a long passage praising Marduk. Its primary original purpose is unknown, although a version is known to have been used for certain festivals. There may have also been a political element, centered on the legitimization or primacy of Mesopotamia over Assyria. Some later versions replace Marduk with the Assyrian primary god Ashur. The Enuma Elish exist in various copies from Babylon and Assyria. The composition of the text probably dates to the late 2nd millennium BCE or even earlier, to the time of Hammurabi during the Old Babylonian period, which was between 1900 and 1600 BCE. Atrahasis is a 17th century BCE Akkadian epic recorded in various versions on clay tablets named for its protagonist Atrahasis, meaning exceedingly wise. It contains both a creation myth explaining how the gods created humankind, and an early flood account which was later incorporated into the Epic of Gilgamesh and is also thought to have influenced the biblical flood story. The name Atrahasis also appears as king of Shuruppak in the times before a flood on one of the Sumerian kings list. The oldest known copy of the epic tradition concerning Atrahasis can be dated by Ctesiphon to the reign of Hammurabi's great-grandson Ame-Saduqa between 1646 and 1626 BCE. However, various Old Babylonian fragments exist, and the epic continued to be copied into the first millennium BCE. The story of Atrahasis also exists in a later Assyrian version, first rediscovered in the library of Ashurbanipal, though its translations have been uncertain due to the artifact being in fragmentary condition and containing ambiguous words. Nonetheless, its fragments were first assembled and translated by George Smith as the Chaldean account of Genesis. In 1965, Wilford G. Lambert and Alan R. Millard published many additional texts belonging to the epic, including an Old Babylonian copy written around 1650 BCE, which is the most complete recension of the tale to have survived. These new texts greatly increased knowledge of the epic and were the basis for Lambert and Millard's first English translation of the Atrahasis epic. The Sumerian Kings List is an ancient literary composition written in Sumerian that was likely created and redacted to legitimize the claims to power of various city-states and kingdoms in southern Mesopotamia during the late 3rd and early 2nd millennium BCE. It does so by repetitively listing Sumerian cities, the kings that ruled there, and the lengths of their reigns. Especially in the early part of the list, these reigns often span thousands of years. In the oldest known version, dated to the Third period, which was between 2112 and 2004 BCE, but probably based on Akkadian source material, the Sumerian Kings List reflected a more linear transition of power from Kesh, the first city to receive kingship, to Akkad. In later versions from the Old Babylonian period, the list consisted of many cities between which kingship was transferred, reflecting a more cyclical view of how kingship came to a city, only to be inevitably replaced by the next. In its best known and best preserved version, as recorded on the Weld Blundell prism, the Sumerian Kings List begins with several antediluvial kings who ruled before a flood swept over the land, after which kingship went to Kesh. It ends with a dynasty from Ison, which was the early 2nd millennium BCE, which is well known from other contemporary sources. Thought of as more of an epic story than a religious text, the Epic of Gilgamesh is often cited as a piece of holy literature. In fact, it is widely considered the earliest great literature. This great epic tells the story of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. The very first parts of this story, including 5 Sumerian poems, were written first, then combined with future works to create one large epic. The oldest surviving completed compilation of the completed work is dated to the 18th century BCE and is widely known as the Old Babylonian version, which was subtitled Surpassing All Other Kings. The culmination of the story involves Gilgamesh discovering, after years of dangerous and exhausting travel to discover the secret of eternal life, that life, which you look for, you will never find. For when the gods created man, they let death be his share, and life withheld in their own hands. Inanna appears in more myths than any other Sumerian deity. She also has a uniquely high number of epitaphs and alternate names comparable only to Nergal. Many of her myths involve her taking over the domains of other deities. Inanna/Ishtar's most famous myth is the story of her descent into and return from the ancient Mesopotamian underworld, ruled by her older sister Erishkigal. After she reaches Erishkigal's throne room, the 7 judges of the underworld deem her guilty and strike her dead. 3 days later, Ninshubur pleads with all the gods to bring Inanna back. All of them refuse her except Enki, who sends 2 sexless beings to rescue Inanna. They escort Inanna out of the underworld, but the Gala, the guardians of the underworld, drag her husband Dumuzid down to the underworld as her replacement. Dumuzid is eventually permitted to return to heaven for half the year, while her sister Gestiana remains in the underworld for the other half, resulting in the cycle of the seasons. Other Inanna texts include Inanna and the Hulupu tree, Inanna and Utu, Inanna prefers the farmer, Inanna and Enki, Inanna takes command of heaven, Inimakur and the Lord of Arata, Inanna and Eba, Inanna and Shukaltuda, Inanna and Bilalulu, among many others. Basically, the composition is a Sumerian text preserved on Old Babylonian tablets, and many of its traits take us back to the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, because not only Enki's temple in Eridu is in full activity, but also shows that trade was becoming intense with the countries of the Persian Gulf, with as the capital and the most important trading center. In this myth, Enki blesses the cities of Nippur, the place where the gods are born, Maluha in the Indus Valley, and Dilmun, with abundant crops, flocks, precious metals, and success in war. Then he organizes the sea, rivers, clouds, and rain, turning the barren hills into fields and creating the rivers Tigris and Euphrates by filling their beds with a stream of his own semen. Enki also makes the sheep, cattle, and crops multiply and establishes the skills of building and weaving. As he creates each domain, Enki appoints a god or goddess to supervise it. When he has finished appointing the gods their domains, Inanna approaches Enki and complains to him that he had failed to give her a domain. Enki responds by listing numerous powers and domains possessed by Inanna, adding each time, "Young Inanna, what more could we add for you?" Finally, Enki says to the maiden goddess, Inanna, "You have the power to destroy what cannot be destroyed, and to set up what cannot be set up." 2 full copies of Enki and Ninhurshag have been uncovered. One from Nippur, which contains the complete text, although some passages on the tablet are broken, and another from found in the house of a priest of Enki, where half of the text is missing. The second tablet contains less lines, thus it is considered a truncated version. In Enki and Ninhurshag, the goddess complains to Enki that the city of Dilmun is lacking in water. As a result, Enki makes the land rich, and Dilmun becomes a prosperous wetland. Afterwards, he and Ninhurshag sleep together, resulting in a daughter, Ninsar. Ninsar matures quickly, and Enki spots her walking along the bank and sleeps with her, resulting in another daughter, Ninkura. Enki spots her and sleeps with her as well, resulting in Utu. After Enki has intercourse with Utu, Ninhurshag removes the semen from her womb and plants it in the earth, causing 8 plants to spring up. As a result of his actions, Ninhurshag curses Enki by casting her life-giving eye away from him. Enki then becomes gravely ill. A fox then makes an offer to Enlil that he will bring Ninhurshag back to cure him. In exchange, Enlil promises to erect 2 birch trees for the fox in the city and to give the creature fame. The fox is able to retrieve Ninhurshag, and she then cures Enki, giving birth to 8 minor deities from his ailing body parts. Comparisons between this myth and that of Genesis are common. As suggested by Samuel Kramer and W. F. Albright, Enki's eating of the 8 plants and the consequences following his actions can be compared to the consumption of the fruit of knowledge by Adam and Eve. The Code of Hammurabi is a Babylonian legal text composed circa 1755 to 1750 BCE. It is the longest, best organized, and best preserved legal text from the ancient Near East. It is written in the Old Babylonian dialect of Akkadian, purportedly by Hammurabi, 6th king of the first dynasty of Babylon. The primary copy of the text is inscribed on a diorite stone about 7 feet 4.5 inches tall. The stele was rediscovered in 1901 at the site of Susa in present-day Iran, where it had been taken as a plunder 600 years after its creation. The text itself was copied and studied by Mesopotamian scribes for over a millennium. The stele now resides in the Louvre Museum. The top of the stele features an image in relief of Hammurabi with Shamash, the Babylonian sun god and god of justice. Below the relief are about 4,130 lines of cuneiform text. 1/5 contains a prologue and epilogue in poetic style, while the remaining 4/5 contain what are generally called the laws. In the prologue, Hammurabi claims to have been granted his rule by the gods to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. The laws are causistic, expressed as if-then conditional sentences. Their scope is broad, including, for example, criminal law, family law, property law, and commercial law. Modern scholars responded to the code with admiration at its perceived fairness and respect for the rule of law, and at the complexity of Old Babylonian society. There was also much discussion of its influence on the Mosaic Law. Scholars quickly identified lex talionis, the eye for an eye principle, underlying the two collections. Debate among Assyriologists has since centered around several aspects of the code: its purpose, its underlying principles, its language, and its relation to earlier and later law collections. Despite the uncertainty surrounding these issues, Hammurabi is regarded outside Assyriology as an important figure in the history of law and the document as a true legal guide. The U.S. Capitol has a relief portrait of Hammurabi alongside those of other lawgivers. The Lament for or Lamentation over the city of is a Sumerian lament composed around the time of the fall of to the Elamites and the end of the city's third dynasty, circa 2000 BCE. It contains one of 5 known Mesopotamian city laments for ruined cities in the voice of the city's goddess. The other city laments are the Lament for Sumer and the Lament for Nippur, the Lament for Eridu, and the Lament for Uruk. The Book of Lamentations of the Old Testament, which bewails the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon in the 6th century BCE, is similar in style and theme to these early Mesopotamian laments. Similar laments can be found in the Book of Jeremiah, the Book of Ezekiel, and the Book of Psalms. The lament is composed of 438 lines in 11 sections arranged in stanzas of 6 lines. It describes the goddess Ningal, who weeps for her city after pleading with the god Enlil to call back a destructive storm. Interspersed with the goddess's wailing are other sections, possibly of different origin and composition. These describe the ghost town that has become, recount the wrath of Enlil's storm, and invoke the protection of the god Inanna, which was Nergal or Suan, against future calamities. Ningal, the wife of the moon god Inanna, goes on to recall her petition to the leaders of the gods, On and Enlil, to change their minds and not to destroy The Council of Gods decide that the third dynasty, which had reigned for around 100 years, had its destiny apportioned to end. The temple treasury was raided by invading Elamites, and the center of power in Sumer moved to Isin, while control of trade in passed to several leading families of the city. The destruction of the location is reported to Enlil and his consort Ninlil, who are praised and exalted at the end of the myth. Adapa was a Mesopotamian figure who unknowingly refused the gift of immortality. The story, commonly known as Adapa and the South Wind, is known from fragmentary tablets from Tel el Amarna in Egypt, which was around 14th century BCE, and from finds from the library of Ashurbanipal, Assyria, around the 7th century BCE. Adapa was an important figure in Mesopotamian religion. His name would be used to invoke power in exorcism rituals. He also became an archetype for a wise ruler. In that context, his name would be invoked to evoke favorable comparisons. The Kesh temple hymn is one of the oldest surviving pieces of literature in the world. It is often also known as the Liturgy to Nintud, or the Liturgy to Nintud on the creation of man and woman. The first discovered tablets that were a part of this work were found during the excavations of a library temple in Nippur, the most ancient Sumerian city which focused on the worship of the gods Enlil and Ninlil, who Sumerians believed created all things. The hymn consists of 134 lines, originally split into 8 different houses, each ending with a unique rhetorical question. The pyramid texts are also known as one of the oldest religious texts in the world. During the 5th or 6th dynasties of the Old Kingdom in ancient Egypt, the text was carved onto the walls and within the sarcophagi of the Saqqara pyramids. These texts were meant to be for the pharaoh and were reserved for him. The text of this religious script has to do with the protocol of dealing with the pharaoh's body after his death, including how to protect his remains and ensure his reanimation after his passing, which would allow him to carry on to the afterlife and ascend to heaven. These ways were known as the utterances, or spells, and could be used to ask for the help of gods and even punish or threaten gods who decided not to lend their help. The Book of the Heavenly Cow is an ancient Egyptian text dealing with the rebellion of humanity against the sun god Ra, his destruction of the rebels through the goddess Hathor, and the reversal of this decision and Ra's mercy, and his ascent into the higher heavens, leaving earth in a fallen state. The work has been compared with the Mesopotamian Atrahasis and the biblical tale of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood, and is thought to have been known in some form during the first intermediate period between 2181 and 2040 BCE, and written during the Middle Kingdom, which was 2040 to 1782 BCE, but the extant scripts all come from the New Kingdom, which is from 1570 to 1069 BCE. The texts were found in the tombs of pharaohs Tutankhamun, Seti I, Ramses II, Ramses III, and Ramses VI. Except for the tomb of Ramses VI, which contained the text on papyrus sheets, the myth was found inscribed on the walls of the tombs, and none of them on their own are complete. It is only by combining the different finds that scholars have been able to assemble the work, and even so, the conclusion has been lost. The central narrative of humanity's rebellion and the gods' reaction, however, is complete. Since it was composed before the Atrahasis or the Great Flood story from the Book of Genesis, the Book of the Heavenly Cow may have inspired these later works, as all deal with a strikingly similar theme. Much like the pyramid texts, the Coffin Texts are a collection of funerary works consisting of 1,815 spells to help bring the deceased to the afterlife safely and to protect them from danger in their journey. No longer reserved for pharaohs, anyone who could afford to be buried in a coffin could have access to parts of the text. Due to often being written on the interior of coffins, the coffin text spells were often shortened or simplified. More complex, full versions were found in later works that it inspired, such as the Book of the Dead. The coffin texts mainly focus on and describe the afterlife governed by the god Osiris. One of the most important books of this collection of texts is the Book of Two Ways, which is the first text found that maps out the ancient Egyptian idea of the underworld. The Book of the Dead isn't exactly a book. It is a large number of texts compiled. This funerary text describes a list of spells that can be used by individuals to make their journey from the underworld to the afterlife. There are some alternate translations of the title of this work, including the Book of the Coming Forth by Day and the Book of Emerging Forth into the Light. The book was placed into the coffin or burial chamber of those who had passed away, and its contents derived from years and years of spells written by many different priests. The earliest spells are taken from the pyramid and coffin text. Written on papyrus with hieroglyphic script, no canonical version of the Book of the Dead exists due to the countless variations discovered over the years. Knowledge of the existence of this holy text was present since the Middle Ages, so it's not possible to accurately say when it was discovered and by who. The Instruction of Amenemope is often credited for its strong resemblance and relationship to the Bible's Book of Proverbs. On top of that, it is often considered a masterpiece and an essential part of wisdom literature. The text consists of a whopping 30 chapters of advice written by a scribe named Amenemope to pass on to his son and to provide him with wisdom on how to live a successful life. It discusses values and attitudes needed in order to live happily despite the increasing social and economic difficulties in the world. The format of this instruction somewhat resembles that of an earlier non-religious ancient text called the Maxims of Ptah-hotep. Directly translating as praise knowledge, the Rigveda is one of the 4 canonical Hindu sacred texts that collectively make up the Vedas. It is essentially a collection of over 1,000 hymns that contain a total of 10,600 verses. The massive number of hymns in the Rigveda are arranged in 10 books known as the mandalas, with the hymns shortening in length but increasing in number across each book. The first 8 books written focus more on worship towards Rigvedian gods, but the final 2 books bordered on philosophical and discussed charity and morality. Unfortunately, much of the language used in the Rigveda is obscure, and as a result, many parts of it remain untranslated till this day. It remains one of the oldest discovered Indo-European extant texts, and today is one of the oldest religious texts still in use. Literally translating to song knowledge, the Samaveda contains chants and speaks of melodies comprising of 1,875 verses that are mainly derived from the Rigveda. Some parts of the Samaveda are believed to date back to the Rigveda period, but the first version of the Samaveda used today surfaced around 1200 BCE. This text contains 2 primary Upanishads, which are essentially pillars of Hinduism. Many traditional Indian dances are said to have their roots in the contents of the Samaveda, which is fitting since the Samaveda is officially considered the Veda of chants. The title of this text, Yajurveda, literally translates to prose mantra knowledge, and as such, this Veda is the Veda of prose chants. It essentially is comprised of ritual chants and formulas and is divided into 2. One part of the text is the Krishna, black section, which contains verses that are not well arranged. The other part is the Sukla, white section, which has a much better structure. 4 of the former's recensions and 2 of the latter's recensions continue to be used today. The Yajurveda contains 1,875 verses which, while unique, are based on the foundation built by the Rigveda. The text also holds the largest collection of primary Upanishads. The Atharvaveda is one of the oldest religious texts in the world and dates to around 1200 BCE. Unlike the other parts of the Vedas, the Atharvaveda has a more complex translation, quote, knowledge storehouse of the Atharvanas, the procedures for everyday life, end quote. The text is divided into 20 books which share 6,000 mantras and 730 hymns between them. Some parts of this Veda discuss ancient medicine and medicinal procedures, providing some of the earliest evidence and record of religious medical practices. As we wrap up this presentation, the archive iterates that this compilation of ancient text is but a cursory introduction. Essentially, it only scratches the surface of the hundreds if not thousands of texts discovered thus far from our antiquity that changed the way we interpret human history. The archive has planned several more episodes in this series, some of which will focus on the more obscure religious and esoteric texts, such as the Book of Enoch and the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. A great many of the texts in this presentation and future planned episodes are the actual source material for the fundamental premise of the ancient astronaut hypothesis. Thus, if you are looking for the actual historical references for the Anunnaki, this series will serve as a great jumping-off point in such an endeavor. And as always, we are grateful for your viewership and encourage you to explore the rest of the Ancient Astronaut Archive.